Today our topic is the quadratic formula. Our learning target is how can I solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So this is going to be our last way to solve quadratic equations. Quadratic formula. The solutions of the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 are x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That is the quadratic formula, and that is what you will need to memorize. You will need to know that. That is important. Where a cannot equal 0 and b squared minus 4ac is greater than or equal to 0. Now, that has to be greater than or equal to 0 because it is underneath the radical. Anything underneath the radical needs to be greater than or equal to 0. Otherwise, we would have no solution. So if it's less than, that's going to be a no solution. All right. So let's use the quadratic formula to find the solutions of 3x squared plus 5x equals 8. First off, everything needs to be an ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. If it's not, that's your first step. Make it equal to 0. So for this one, we would minus 8 on both sides. We get 3x squared plus 5x minus 8 equals 0. Identify your a, b, and c. A is 3, b is 5, and c is negative 8. The signs go with the numbers. Now, plug it into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b, so negative 5. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 5 squared, minus 4 times a times c. So I'm just putting in the numbers into the quadratic formula. All over 2a, so 2 times 3. Now all we have to do is evaluate this. And our calculator is going to be very helpful with this. So the piece underneath the square root, we can actually type that whole thing into our calculator by bringing up the square root and then parentheses 5 squared minus 4 times a times c. So if we just type that right underneath the radical, it's going to evaluate the whole piece for us, which is really helpful, and then it saves us a lot of steps. So that tells us it's 11. Which is awesome. So now we just have to write x equals negative 5 plus or minus this whole piece was equal to 11. So we put 11 over 2 times 3 is 6. Now we have two cases because of this plus or minus. We have x equals negative 5 plus 11 divided by 6. And we have x equals negative 5 minus 11 divided by 6. Evaluate. Negative 5 plus 11 equals 6 divided by 6 equals 1. So 1 is one solution. And then negative 5 minus 11 equals negative 16 over 6. That can reduce to negative 8 over 3. So our two solutions are 1 and negative 8 thirds. Find that answer. It's not A, it's not B, it is C. Example number 2, solve this quadratic equation. Again, first step is make sure it looks like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This does not, which means we have to start by subtracting x on each side. We have 2x squared. We're going to put the minus x next, then put the minus 7 equals 0. Now we're ready to go. Identify your a, your b, and your c. A is 2, B is negative 1, C is negative 7. Set up the quadratic formula. X equals negative B, so negative 1 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC. So all I did was replace all the letters with numbers all over 2A. Now, please notice that every time I put a number in, I put it in parentheses. You must include the parentheses, otherwise things can get messed up. Operations will be wrong. Now we use our calculator to evaluate. Type in the piece that's underneath the radical, so the square root of -1 squared, that has to be in parentheses, minus 4 times A times C. Press enter, and we get 7.5498. So if we round that to the nearest hundredth, it'd be 7.55. So we can say x equals double negative makes a positive 1, plus or minus 7.55 divided by 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. We set up those two cases. X can be 1 plus 7.55 divided by 4, or x can be 1 minus 7.55 divided by 4, plus or minus here. Two cases. All right, so for the first case, x could equal 2.14. And for the second case, x could be negative 1.64. So that is the solution. Next example, we have example 3 on the back of your paper. For the period of 1971 to 2001, so for 30 years, the number of Y films produced in the world can be modeled by the function y equals 10x squared minus 94x plus 3,900, where x is the number of years since 1971. So if x was 0, that would represent the year 1971, and then so forth. In what year were 4,200 films produced? So y is the number of films produced, which means 4,200 is being substituted in for y. So we can put 4,200 in for y. Now, if we are going to use the quadratic formula, this needs to be equal to 0. So we need to minus 4,200 on each side. When we get 0 equals 10x squared minus 94x minus 300. Now we can use the quadratic formula. Identify your A, your B, your C. A is 10, B is negative 94, and C is negative 300. Again, those signs come with the numbers. Set up the quadratic formula. X equals negative B, so negative 94 plus or minus the square root of B squared, so negative 94 squared, plus or minus, not plus or minus, not there, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. All right, so now again we need to evaluate what's underneath that radical. So we can solve this. So it's going to be x equals 94 plus or minus. Let's type that into our calculator. All right, so we're going to do the square root of negative 94 squared minus 4 times A times C equals 144.34. Now, x is the number of years, and so we're looking for whole years. So we're going to round this to the nearest whole. So let's just round this to 144. All right. So we're going to say plus or minus 144 all over 2a, so all over 20. Our two cases are going to be x equals 94 plus 144 divided by 20, and x equals 94 minus 144 divided by 20. If we solve both of these, x equals 12. And here x would be negative 2.5, which we would round to about negative 3. Again, this is a real life situation, so our negative answer in this case doesn't work, so we're just going to work with that positive answer. However, x equals 12 does not work because we wanted to know in what year were 4,200 films produced. So X is the number of years since 1971. So 12 years after 1971 would be 1971 plus 12, which would give us 1983. So in 1983, there were 4,200 films produced. All right, the last little piece is just kind of a refresher of all the different ways to solve quadratics. So in chapter 9, we talked about factoring. So those are the lessons that we talked about. We did not do 9.8, so just 9.4 through 9.7. So if you need a refresher, you can look back at those videos, but we could factor. Graphing is what we did in the first part of chapter 10. We talked a lot about graphing, and then we just recently added in that vertex form. Then what we've been working on right now is finding square roots, completing the square, and we just added that quadratic formula. So there are multiple different ways to solve quadratic equations. So you have a lot of tools to be able to solve these quadratic equations. Now each one works better in some cases and better in other cases. So in example 4, tell what method you would use to solve the quadratic equation. Explain your choices. I want you to, right now, think about the different ways that you could solve quadratic equations, and I'd like you to write which one you think is best. You must use a different answer for each one. All right, so on A, B, and C, you cannot just write the quadratic equation. You can use the quadratic equation, but I want you to think about the different ways that you can solve it and write that down, and that's what I will be checking when you come with your notes to class. Thank you for watching this video, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel.